Today we're going to be looking at special quadrilaterals, special parallelograms actually. So all of these shapes are going to be parallelograms. All the properties that we've learned for parallelograms are still going to apply, but now we're going to be specializing them. So the rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. So it is a parallelogram and all 4 sides are congruent. A rectangle is a parallelogram with 4 right angles. And if you don't know that from kindergarten, maybe we ought to review a little bit. And finally, a square is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides and 4 right angles. It is both a rectangle and a rhombus. So squares are rectangles and rhombuses, but not every rhombus is a square, not every rectangle is a square. And all of these things are parallelograms. So you need to know how to distinguish between them and what the properties of each one are. And quite honestly, the only thing that should be new to you here maybe is the idea of a rhombus. Maybe you haven't seen that one before, all 4 sides congruent. Again, we've got these corollaries that these are the theorems that make these definitions true. So again, it's the same basic idea, rhombus to rhombus, only if it has 4 congruent sides. Quadrilateral is a rectangle only if it has 4 right angles. And of course, square if it's a rectangle and a rhombus. So I'm going to give you 4 statements. You tell me which one is not correct. For any rhombus, Q, R, S, T, decide whether the statement is always, sometimes, or never true. Draw a diagram and explain your reasoning. So pretty straightforward. We're going to go ahead and draw ourselves a rhombus. I get to cheat a little bit because I do have the drawing tool here. So I'm going to guesstimate that that's a rhombus, and it's going to be QRST. So we'll go around in order. And it's going to say, is angle Q always, sometimes, or never congruent to angle S? Do I know that the opposite angles in a rhombus are congruent? And again, we have to go back and think, well, what type of shape is a rhombus? A rhombus is a parallelogram with 4 congruent sides. Oh, it's a parallelogram. Well, what are the properties of a parallelogram? Opposite sides congruent, opposite angles congruent, both pairs of, or the diagonals bisect each other. So all those things have to be true for a rhombus also. So angle Q and angle S are opposite angles, so therefore they have to be congruent. Yes. That's a big old yes. They have to be, because opposite angles of any parallelogram are congruent. Sorry about the sneeze, not always the best thing to do in a podcast, so I apologize ahead of time if I do. I'm sure that probably makes a lot of noise. I'm sorry, I'm taking my microphone off so I don't sneeze into the microphone. Next says angle Q congruent to angle R. So is it possible that angle Q and angle R are congruent? Okay, by the way, by yes I meant always, sorry. Is it possible that angle Q and R are congruent? Now, those are consecutive angles. Consecutive angles in parallelograms are supplementary. They add up to 180. So clearly Q and R, since it's a rhombus, will not always be congruent. But could they be congruent? Yeah, sometimes if it's a square. So the answer here, that is sometimes true. If it is also a square. Since we know it's a rhombus, it would also have to be a rectangle that would make it a square. So it's possible that that's sometimes true, but it's not always going to be true. So obviously the big thing here is understanding the properties of these shapes. We spent a whole lot of time in the first half of the chapter understanding the properties of parallelograms. Now we've got all these new shapes that are also parallelograms, so they share all those properties we learned. We're going to add new stuff to it. That's the hard part about this chapter, is keeping track of what all the properties are and what shapes they apply to. But that's going to be kind of our semester here, is we have to keep track of a lot of facts. It says, classify the special quadrilateral, explain your reasoning, based on the information that we have here. Now, the information I have is this. I have all four sides congruent. So that means it's definitely a rhombus. The question we have, is it also a square? So we know it's a parallelogram, obviously. We know it's got all four sides congruent. That makes it a rhombus. But is it a square? And the answer is no, it's not a square, because this angle is not a right angle. A square is a rhombus that has four right angles. A square that is also a rectangle. This is not a rectangle, therefore it is not a square, but it is indeed a rhombus. And we could do that, and we could keep doing this for a long time. We could do lots of examples like this where I give you a shape, and I'm going to give you a fact about it, and you tell me what sort of shape it has to be. Angle 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm going to tell you that the measure of angle 1 equals the measure of angle 2 equals the measure of angle 3 equals the measure of angle 4. What type of shape is it? If that's true. And then you have to think about that and say, okay, all four angles are congruent. Well, that means both pairs of opposite angles are congruent, so it's definitely a parallelogram. If all four angles are congruent, that means it has to be a rectangle. The question, again, we have to ask ourselves, though, is some rectangles are squares. We can be even more specific. Do I have information to conclude that it's a square? What else would I need to know? I'd need to know that all four sides are congruent. Do I know that? No, I do not. So I cannot make the conclusion of square. That is a rectangle. I could do another one. Okay. This time I'm going to say that these two sides are congruent and that they are also parallel. What type of shape do we have? Well, in order to say square, I need all four sides congruent and all four angles congruent. I don't have that. In order to say rectangle, I need all four angles congruent. Now, I got parallel sides, but that doesn't give me any congruent angles in this case. Okay, it gives me consecutive angles, which are supplementary, but does not give me any congruent angles. I don't have all four sides congruent either, so it's not a rhombus. But I do have one pair of sides both parallel and congruent, so that makes it a parallelogram. So again, what we want to do is we want to be able to tell what is the most specific name we can give the shape based on the information we're given. It's not always drawn to look exactly like what it is. Like here, this does not look like a rectangle, does it? But maybe it's in some sort of perspective with all four angles being congruent. So we have to go with our facts, and we have to know what our facts are, and we have to know what the classifications are. Guess what? We always wind up in the coordinate plane. And it says, okay, determine whether this is a rectangle, rhombus, or square. Okay, give all the names that apply. So how am I going to make that determination? Well, I'm going to have to find the lengths of the sides. I'm going to have to find the slopes of the sides. I can determine congruence using lengths. So I'm going to have to find AB. And let's go ahead and do that together. AB, A is at negative 2, 6. So negative 2 and a 6. B is at 6, 8. So when I do that, negative 2 minus 6 is negative 8 squared. 6 minus 8 is negative 2 squared. That's 64 plus 4. This side is the square root of 68. I don't need to simplify that. That's fine. That's the length of that side. Next, I find CD. I want to determine if it's even a parallelogram. Or any other side. I could find BC also. So BC would be 6 minus 4 squared plus 8 minus 0 squared. 2 squared plus 8 squared. Oh, I saw that. I've seen that before. That's square root of 68. Hey, I've got two sides the same. I'd have to keep going and show all four sides are the same, or they're not. Next, I'd have to determine, and if they are all the same, then I could say it's a rhombus. Could I say it's a square? Well, I don't know. I'd have to check the slopes of the sides to see if any of the sides are perpendicular. And I'm going to leave that to you to do as part of your question night, and you're going to answer then what type of shape it finally winds up being. And again, when we do this on our quiz or a test, it's not going to be multiple choice. You're going to have to show your work, and you're going to have to state your conclusions based on what your work shows you. Don't forget that. In the homework, you're going to have to show your work and state your conclusions based on what the work shows you. So spend a little time, finish this problem up. That's your assignment. Answer what it is. And that will be something actually I will be checking as I'm checking your notes. I'm going to be checking that you've actually finished this problem to show what it is. So make sure you do so. All right? I will leave you to finish this, and that's the end of our notes for today.